The road out seems quiet, but the giant warning sign almost blocking the driver's view speaks volumes. Evacuation is risky when there are paramilitary roadblocks to pass through. At 3:30 this afternoon, Khartoum time, a woman filmed from her window. She told us about plans for a community protest, and whether or not she goes depends on when the firing stops. Others have managed to leave, though that word makes it sound easy. Noon Abdul Basit sent us this video of her family's journey to Egypt. It took them 48 hours.
Leaving Khartoum, we were met by multiple RSF and SAF checkpoints. They walked into our bus. Thankfully, we were moving as a family and we had kids on board with us. So they didn't really ask us too many questions. But even leaving the country, we could see burnt trucks. We saw tanks on the road. And the soldiers were just everywhere.
We now know that British diplomats and their families have been evacuated from Sudan. They were taken to an airfield outside of Khartoum to fly out of the country overnight. But there are other British nationals there too.
The best thing that we can do to support British nationals, and indeed everyone in Sudan, is push the generals involved in this conflict to bring it to an end, and that will remain the priority of our diplomatic focus in the region.
The tussle for power between Sudan's army and the RSF paramilitary group, or Rapid Support Forces, is painfully definitive for the Sudanese people, and unbearably close. Burned mattresses and shelled bedposts and lost loved ones.
He was our elder son. He used to help the people in need and support the helpless people, and we lost him. He died in his bed. He was hit in his bed, and after the shell hit him, I went in the room, and the shells were in the beds. We are badly affected by the shelling.
If buying bread is an ordeal, then trying to access medical care feels nigh on impossible. Some doctors have been using the power of the internet to connect people to much-needed services. Others have utilised platforms like WhatsApp, though the internet and phone lines seem to be down across much of the country today. Noon's family home was destroyed 3 days before they embarked on their journey. She says the pursuit of refuge is already being financially exploited.
So people will most likely have to start selling properties, having to steal just to be able to make these trips. We just completely left our house open, left our lives, left our jobs, our schools and universities, and leave the rest of our families and everyone that we love, and come to Egypt.
This was in Khartoum too. Members of the Sudan Armed Forces jubilant, weapons aloft, on what was meant to be the third day of a ceasefire.
Well, I'm joined now by Ash Alexander Cooper, former Joint Operational Commander with the British Armed Forces. He worked at Britain's Permanent Joint Headquarters, the hub of UK planning for overseas military operations. Ash Alexander Cooper, can you explain why the government is extracting diplomats but not yet British citizens too?
Well, I don't think we should be surprised that the employer, which is the British government, has a duty of care to its employees, and their safety is clearly paramount. But equally, the British Embassy is in a part of Khartoum that has seen some of the worst or the most vicious fighting in the recent days, and they were increasingly unable to do their work to either help or negotiate, as it were, or support trying to get the warring parties to stop fighting, but also to do their diplomatic work, looking after the other British nationals that the Foreign Secretary has mentioned.
So now they're extracted. Can they work remotely to get those hundreds, we think, of British nationals out of Sudan? I mean, how challenging is that operation?
I mean, it's an extremely complex operation. Anything like this, where you're trying to evacuate UK entitled persons or indeed the nationals of other countries, because we have so many agreements and partnerships with other nations to try and support them reciprocally if they also need our help or vice versa. But absolutely, they can continue to work from neighbouring countries, and will do so to make sure that they can keep track of all those British nationals who do require support. And if the fighting subsides enough to allow them to be evacuated as well, then of course that's their fundamental priority to try and get them out safely or make sure that they do not get harmed.
But in your view, from a military perspective, the fighting would have to subside considerably before a risky operation to extract those citizens from isolated houses around the place.
I mean, it really depends where the people are. I mean, it's a really difficult part of the operation to even just understand who is in country. Nobody is required necessarily to report to the British Embassy in advance, that they're in country. But as you may have seen, a lot of requests from the Foreign Office for people to please register if they are in the country and do need support or are in places where fighting is fierce. But these things are extremely risky. So the planning will continue. And if the situation deteriorates further, of course, the British military and the Foreign Office will be looking at contingency plans to try and evacuate those even if it isn't even if there isn't a period of fighting has subsided. It just happened last night, I understand it, that when the evacuation did take place, they were lucky that there was a period of relative calm that enabled forces to be able to extract those diplomats.
So special forces, the military, would have to act with lightning quick speed to sort of pounce the moment there's an opportunity.
Well, the package of Army, Navy, Air Force, all of the British military and their allies, the US and the French, I believe, are involved as well. We have very close relationships with all of those countries' militaries, and this is where they really do excel. The mission command enabling low-level commanders on the ground to be trusted and empowered to make the right decisions when it matters, when the situation is dynamically changing, means that if there is any opportunity, they will take it to ensure that they can get as many people out safely and securely as quickly as they can.
In public perception, at least, the fact that diplomats have been taken out but citizens remain, British citizens remain, isn't there a risk that the fiasco over Afghanistan, the evacuation there, is repeated? And have lessons been learnt from that, in your view?
Well, I would hope, and I'm sure lessons have been learned. Many of the troops involved in the British evacuation mission currently will have actually almost certainly been part of that Afghan evacuation operation in 2021. And many of the commanders will have extensive operational experience in doing this. How they do it clearly will be fairly close-hold and sensitive. But I believe that all the right folks are involved, and in conjunction with our allies, they will do everything they can.
Ash Alexander Cooper, thanks very much for joining us.